Today we will discuss some of the important aspects in cash management. The first thing that we will discuss is how to control cash collection and disbursement. The strategic aspect of efficient cash management approaches are you need to speedily collect all the accounts receivable. So from where all you have to receive money, you need to collect them at the earliest, and you can delay the payment on accounts payable. This is one of the strategy that most of the companies are willing to follow. They want to receive their money early and try to make the payments later. So what can we do to get a speedy cash collection? It is basically we have to manage the cash efficiently. The cash inflow process can be accelerated through systematic planning and refined techniques. What kind of techniques? There are two broad approaches to do this. The first is the customer should be encouraged to pay quickly as possible. And secondly, the payment from customer should be converted into cash without any delay. So even if the customer has paid early, he has sent a check on 1st Jan, and if we wait to deposit the check into the bank till 20th Jan, we cannot use that money for 20 days. So not only we have to motivate the customers to pay early, but we have to also put efforts to collect or to convert that check or to convert that payment into cash without any delay. One way to ensure that the customer will pay early is prompt billing. So what, even immediately if you give the bill to the customer as soon as he purchases the goods from you, it will be very easy for him to make the payments. And you can also give the bill with a enclosed self-addressed return envelope where he can put his check and he can send us. So the payment can be made in the speed. Another and more important technique to encourage prompt payment by customers is the practice of cash discount. So you do prompt billing, notify the customer about the bill, and put the bill in a envelope, self-addressed envelope, where he can put the check and return back that envelope. And secondly, we can give cash discount so that we encourage them to make payments at the earliest. Early conversion of payment into cash. So this is a very important thing, the second part that I had told you. Now, while we're doing this, we are facing a certain issues. We'll discuss what are those issues, and we basically call them as lethargy or float. Okay, so let's see. Once the customer makes the payment by writing a check in the favor of the firm, the collection can be expedited by prompt encashment of check. So they have to encash the check immediately. There is a lag between the time a check is prepared and mailed by the customer and the time funds are included in the cash reservoir of the firm. Within the time interval, three steps are involved. So, suppose the customer has posted the check on 1st January and the money in the account went on 10th January. So, within these days, there were three things that happened. First is the transit or the mailing time. The customer might have mailed the check from Bangalore to reach to Belagavi. So it may take 2 days to reach by speed post. So this is called as postal float, the time taken by post to transfer the check from the customer to your company. So we call it as a trading or mailing time, or we also call it as a postal float because that is the time taken by the post. Then time taken in processing the check. Once the check comes, immediately the accountant may not process and go and deposit into the bank. The check may lie down on his desk for a day or two, where he'll make the entries, record, put the proper things in the journal and ledger accounts, and then send the check to the bank. Now, this 1 or 2 days are called as lethargy. Lethargy because the accountant was not proactive in doing it. He took his own time and according to his pace, he has done the processing of the check. Once the processing is done and it is deposited into the bank will also take 2 to 3 days to clear the check. So it will say the check is of another bank. It will take time to clear. Clearing days are 2 or 3 days. So collection time within banks, this is called as bank float. So when we are getting check from the customer till it deposits into our account, there are three kinds of floats or delays that happen. The very first is the postal float, delay because of post office time taken to transfer the check. Then lethargy, this is the delay because the accountant took time in processing the check and depositing it into the bank. And the third one is the bank float, where the bank took time to convert the check into cash because of clearing from the other bank and deposit it into your account. Now, the early conversion of payment into cash as a technique to speed up collection of accounts receivable is done to reduce the time lag between the posting of the check by the customer and the realization of the money by the firm. So how can we do early payment? By reducing these floats, the postal float, the lethargy, and the bank float. If we are able to reduce this and make the money reach into the account of the customer at the earliest, that means we are being successful in speedily collecting our money. The postal float, lethargy, and bank float all put together or collectively are called as deposit float, because all the three came into picture when one customer was trying to deposit money into your account. The term float is defined as the sum of checks returned by customers that are not yet usable by the firm. So total amount of checks returned by customers, but they're still not usable by you because they've written and they've sent, and the checks are either in transit, so postal float, or they're with the accountant in lethargy, or they're with the bank in the clearing, so bank float. So they are not yet usable by you. So float is the total number of checks unusable because they are in deposit float. An important cash management technique is reduction in deposit float. And what is deposit float? I'll repeat it. It is sum total of postal float, time taken by the post, lethargy, time taken by the accountant, and bank float, time taken by the bank. All three put together is deposit float, and we need to reduce this. This is possible if the firm adopts policy of decentralized collection. Instead of telling all the customers to send all the checks to the head office, if we can allow them to collect the money, or if we can collect money in a decentralized way, it will be faster. That means, suppose I have a branch in Bengaluru, in Kolkata, in Chennai, and in Belgaum. And suppose Belgavi is the headquarter. No need for all of them to send the check to Belgavi branch. Bangalore branch people can deposit the check into my Bangalore bank account. Chennai people can deposit the check into Chennai bank account, or in that branch they can send the check. So by this we will be able to reduce the postal float because customer will be easily able to go and deposit the money. So there are basically two techniques or principal methods to establish decentralized collection network. One is the concentration banking and the other is the lockbox system. These two are very important. Let us understand what is concentration banking. Concentration banking is a system of operating through a number of collection centers instead of a single collection center centralized at the firm's head office. So I told you earlier, we can have multiple collection centers in different cities where all we are operating instead of having a centralized collection center in the head office. The basic objectives of decentralized collection is to minimize the lag, that is the time between the mailing time from customer to the firm. Under this system, the firm will have a large number of bank accounts operated in the areas where the firm has its branches. So if I have branch in Bengaluru, Chennai, and Kolkata, in all the three branches, I will have three bank accounts, and all the customer checks of that area will go in those bank accounts. All branches may not have the collection center. The selection of collection center will depend upon the volume of billing. Now, all the three branches of Bangalore, Kolkata, and Chennai need not always have collection centers. If I'm selling less number of goods in Kolkata, there is no need to open a bank account there. I can just have bank accounts in Bangalore, Chennai, and Belgavi and ask Kolkata checks to get to come to the head office that is in Belgavi. So it depends on the volume of billing. If your sales are too high in that particular city, you can have a bank center or a collection center in that particular city, so you can open a bank account. So concentration banking is basically opening bank accounts where the offices are located instead of routing all the checks to the head office. The collection center will be required to collect checks from customers and deposit it into their local bank accounts. So the customers will send the checks to the collection center, and from there those checks are sent to the local bank accounts. The collection center will transfer funds above some predetermined minimum to a central or concentration bank account. The concentration bank is one where the firm has a major account, usually the disbursement account. So we can say that from Belagavi we are making all the payments. So I'll have the main account in Belagavi, and Bangalore, Chennai, and Kolkata banks will collect money and they will transfer the money to my Belagavi branch account because I have to make payments. So collections are decentralized, and then after collecting they are sent to a centralized account which is the head office account, from where the head office is making all the payments. And collection centers like the suppose I have SBI branch Bangalore will be my collection center. They will collect money and transfer it to Belgavi main branch SBI. Same way Kolkata and Chennai. So they will collect and they will not send the entire money. They will send the predetermined minimum they will keep and the rest they will transfer. Funds can be transferred to a central or concentration bank by telex or fax or online bank transfers. So it's very easy to transfer from the decentralized accounts to centralized account. Decentralized collection system saves mailing and processing time and thus reduces the deposit float. So the customers need not post it, so postal float is reduced. The accountant need not handle your check. The checks are directly going to the bank. Bank is depositing, so lethargy is reduced. So that was about concentration banking, opening different bank accounts wherever you operate, depending upon the volume of billing. And then when money is collected in those bank accounts, it can be transferred to the main head office bank account. The next is the lockbox system. And the lockbox system, which is another technique for speeding up the mailing process, mailing, processing time and collection. Time is lockbox system. In concentration banking, checks are received by a collection center and after processing are deposited into the bank. Logbox system helps the firm to eliminate the time between the receipt of check and their deposit in the bank. In a logbox system, the firm establishes a number of collection centers considering customer location and volume of remittance. So in concentration banking, what happened was the customers went and deposited the checks in the collection center where my branch is there or my office is there. From there, the accountant processed the checks and put it into the bank account. So that processing time took some days. But in case of logbook system, there is no need to go to the accountant or to go to the collection center. We can actually set up logbook systems in a particular city near the customer's location, and it all depends on how much volume he is buying from us and how much money he has to give. At each center, the firm hires a post office box. So in Bangalore, I'll hire one or two post office box. In Chennai, one or two, and in Kolkata, one or two, and instructs its customers to mail their remittance in the box. So the customer has to go and put the check in that box. The firm's local bank is given the authority to pick up the remittance directly from the lockbox. So the banker, suppose the entire day customers have put check into that lockbox, the banker will go once or twice in a day to the lockbox, open it and collect all the checks that have been put there so that he can process it further. The firm's local bank is given authority to do this. The bank picks up the mail several times a day and deposits the check in the firm's account. For the internal accounting purpose of the firm, the bank prepares detailed records of the checks picked up. So, for accountant's purpose, the bank will maintain records of all the checks picked up, and they will the cost. So there is no go to the accountant. Even before reaching to the accountant, the bank will handle the deposits and it will just give the details to the accountant. The checks are deposited immediately upon receipt of remittance and the collection process. So immediately the checks come into our account. There is no mailing time and there is no lethargy that happens, and the collection processes sooner than if the firm would have processed them through the accountant. Both the systems involve cost. Whether system should be used or not depends upon the comparison between its cost and benefits. So should I use concentration banking or logbox system? You can decide depending upon how much you're saving, how early you're receiving your money, and which system is more economical. So these were the two important concepts, concentration banking and logbox system, which will help you to collect your money early and try to reduce your deposit float, which consists of postal delay, lethargy of the accountant, and the bank delay. Now, that was the first step, collect speedy collection, which I told you, discussing two things to do. One is speedy collection, and the second is this is here. Okay, so from these two, I finished the speedy cash collection. You can do that by using concentration banking or logbox system. Now we'll see how to delay the payment on accounts payable. The second step, which will help us to manage cash better. So delay the payment, delaying payment on account receivable. This can be done through avoidance of early payment. You can avoid paying promptly. Today the bill has come, today only I'll pay. You can avoid that. Centralized disbursement. You will pay from a centralized center all your centers will not be authorized to pay. So whatever payment has to be done, Bangalore head office only, Belgaum head office only will do it. Bangalore, Chennai and Kolkata branches have to send the payment details. So when you do centralized disbursement, it will take time to receive the details from all the three branches, process it and then pay. So that will also delay the payment. Next is float. You pay it to a far away distant branch. So then what happens in that case is, till it reaches to the branch, till it is processed, that many days your bank will keep it, paying from a distant bank. Okay, and then last is accruals. You tell them that I will pay after 3 months or 6 months. That is basically accruals. You're asking for credit period. And you can also pay, some people use this strategy, they pay the holidays. So the check won't be processed till 2 or 3 continuous public holidays are over, and then the processing will start. So all these strategies are used to delay the payments. So this was about how to manage accounts receivable. One is to speedily collect your own money, and second is to delay the payment in accounts receivable. Now, strategies for managing surplus cash. This is another important topic that all of us to know. With if I have even a bit of surplus cash, what have I to do with it? So the first strategy is do nothing. You keep the cash with you, accumulate the liquidity surplus with you, and you can use it for your daily expenses. But the disadvantage is you will not earn anything on this particular money. Then it will be lying idle in your office without earning anything, but it will give you liquidity cushion. You can use it as and when you require. The second is make ad hoc investment. Ad hoc is unplanned investment or unprepared. You had not planned what to do. All of a sudden, you found a small mutual fund for shorter duration. You put some money there. You put some money in your current account, some in the saving bank account, and some maybe you found some commercial papers trading at a of short duration. You put the money there. So it is unplanned, ad hoc, unprepared. So it is not a strategy which is managed or which is planned in advance, but this will give you at least some money. And you will have to do for it is followed by the firms which cannot devote enough time and resources to management of securities. So if I don't have time, the manager is too busy and he cannot spare time for managing surplus cash, then such ad hoc arrangements can be done. The next is the ride the yield curve. This is a strategy to increase yield from a portfolio of marketable securities by betting on interest rate changes. So here what they do is, uh, they try to increase the earnings on the surplus amount by betting on the interest rate changes. If the financial manager accepts that interest rates will fall in the near future, he would buy long term securities as they appreciate more compared to short term securities. Interest rate is 10% and he feels that next month the interest rate is going to be 8%, he will buy long term securities today itself, because today he can start earning at 10%. If he invests in the next year, it will become 8, next month it will become 8%. So if he predicts that the security interests are going to fall, he will buy in advance long term securities and he leave the money to appreciate them. On the other hand, if he believes that the interest rates are going to rise in the near future, he would sell long term securities today. So suppose I have securities at 10% today, and I know that my security, the interest rate is going to increase by 12%. I will sell all these securities at 10% today, and using that money, next month I will buy again at 12% interest rate. So this is riding on the yield curve. That means he keeps checking the interest and he'll do betting on the interest. If he feels interest is going to fall, he will buy the securities and keep it in advance. If he feels interest is going to rise, he will sell the securities, wait for interest rate to rise and reinvest. This strategy is centered or is hinges on the assumption that the financial manager has a superior interest rate forecasting ability. If he doesn't has it, then he shouldn't go for this. So we say that he should have a superior interest rate forecasting ability. Only then he can take this risk and try. Next is develop guidelines. In this case, what we do is the company develops certain guidelines and gives it to the finance manager. He has to follow those guidelines and then invest the surplus cash. And these guidelines are kept into mind taking into account risk and return both. So it reflects the view of management towards the risk and return. Examples of such guidelines are: do not speculate on interest rate change. So if the management doesn't want to take risk, it will tell the finance manager clearly, don't invest and speculate on interest rate changes. Hold marketable securities till they mature. This can be second guideline. These are just examples. Don't sell the securities before the due date. Wait till the maturity date and then you sell it. Do not put more than a certain percentage of liquid funds in a particular security or instrument, because if they don't want to take this, they will say put only 10% in equity, put 10% in mutual funds, remaining you deposit. Minimize transaction costs. So these are few guidelines which will be set by the management. Follow them and accordingly invest money. The next is utilize control limits. When I was explaining you the Miller-Rowe model, I told you there's something called as upper limit and lower limit. If your cash balance goes above the upper limit, you need to invest that money. If your cash balance goes below the lower limit, you need to sell your investment and recover that money. So you need to keep into account the upper limit and the lower limit and then plan your investments. If it is not touching either the upper or the lower limit, that much money can be kept in the business for your day-to-day usage. So only after you touch the upper limit, you will further plan to sell it, invest in the new securities. And only if you touch the lower limit, you will further plan to sell the securities and recover your money from them. So suppose a firm has upper limit of 10,000 and lower limit of 2,000. Only if I have cash more than 10,000, it has touched the upper limit and I have cash of 12,000, then that extra 2,000 I can invest, and rest 10 will remain as it is. And suppose it touches the lower limit, that is it goes below 2,000, then I can sell some securities and come back to the normal level and use that money. So this is how you can have limits. Then next is manage with the portfolio perspective. You can invest in the you can invest surplus cash by using a portfolio perspective. That means don't invest your entire money in one particular stock or in one particular mutual fund. Create a portfolio where you invest money in different securities and the risk can be avoided. There are two steps to do this. The very first is define the efficient frontier. Here what we basically do is we basically check the securities which are giving you the same expected return at lower risk, at a lower standard deviation. Standard deviation is risk. Or you have those securities whose standard deviation which has the same risk but give you higher returns. Or the third is a high expected return at a low standard deviation. So the three things are: first, you have same return at low risk. So I'll write it here. First, at low risk. Second one is same risk and higher return. And the third one is high return and lower risk. So you find those securities which are giving you same return at low risk. So risk is low and the returns are same, or the securities should give you same risk but high return, or they should give you high return at lower risk. If you find any of these three options, then you can invest in those. Select the optimal portfolio. The optimal portfolio is that point on the efficient frontier which enables the investors to achieve the highest attainable level of utility. So once you find the securities which are giving you all these three, you can put them in a graph and you can draw an efficient frontier to it, which will help you to know which securities you should invest into. So the efficient frontier is a line on the graph. You put dots of each security's return and risk on the graph and you draw a line on those dots. The line should give you low risk and high returns. All the securities that come on that line or nearby that line, you can invest in those particular securities. So this is the last one, manage with the portfolio perspective. The next, that was about strategies for managing surplus cash. So we went through, we do nothing, or we make unplanned, unprepared investments, or we ride on the yield curve by speculating on the interest rate, high interest rate. You buy securities if you feel the interest rate is going to fall. You buy the securities. If you feel it is going to rise, you sell the securities. The company can develop guidelines and give you how to invest. You can use the upper control and the lower control limits, and you can manage it with a portfolio perspective. So those were the strategies for handling surplus cash. Now, long-term cash forecasting. When we come to long-term cash forecasting, this is done for a longer duration and prepared to give an idea of the company's financial requirement in the future. They are not as detailed as short-term forecast, so they'll not be into too much detail. Long-term cash forecast can be made for a period of 2 to 3 or 5 years. Once a company has developed a long-term cash forecast, it can be used to evaluate the impact of, say, new product development or plant acquisition on the firm's financial condition for a longer period. So when you know that you're going to invest huge in the plant or in new product in the future, you can plan for your long-term cash requirements. Long-term cash forecast reflects the impact of growth, expansion, or acquisition. It also indicates financing problems arising from these developments. So if we are going to do expansion, acquisitions, or we are going to grow, what are the financial problems that we'll face and how we can manage it? If you plan it in advance, we call it as long-term cash forecast. The major uses of long-term cash forecast are, it indicates a company's future financial needs, especially for its working capital requirement. So usually in the future, how much working capital we will require, that we forecast here. It helps to evaluate proposed capital projects. It pinpoints the cash required to finance these projects. So capital projects are nothing but long-term projects which are investing for a, in which you will invest to buy machinery, equipments, expand, get a new product, such kind of long-term projects you can invest. So the, it will pinpoint what is the cash required and what are the means to generate the cash, so how the company can support itself with the cash. It helps to improve corporate planning. Long term forecasts compel each division to plan for future and to formulate projects carefully. Then short term cash forecast, it is used for your working capital requirement. It is comparatively easy to make short-term forecasts. The important function of carefully developed short-term cash forecast are, why we do it. It helps you to determine operating cash requirement which you need for day-to-day activities. It will help you to anticipate your short-term financing. It will tell you if you have any surplus cash, how do you manage it. And some more uses of these forecasts are, it will help you to plan, reduce the short and long term debts. If you have extra cash, you can pay back your loans or debt or creditors, and you can minimize the debts. It will help you to plan or planning forward purchase of inventories. If you have surplus cash or cash remaining, you can buy inventory and keep at lower prices. It will help you to take advantages of cash discounts offers, and it will give you, guide you to prepare credit policies. Two most commonly used methods of short-term cash forecasting are the receipt and disbursement method and the adjusted net income method. The receipt and disbursement method is nothing but the cash budget, which I have taught you. The adjusted net income method is not there in these PPTs. It is not there in the syllabus as well. So the receipt and disbursement method is nothing but the cash budget. So cash budget is a statement of the inflows and outflows of cash that is used to estimate its short-term requirements. So first we take the cash receipts, and below that we take the cash payments. So it tells us about the inflows and outflows of the cash, and at the end of the day whether we have surplus or deficit. If we have deficit, we can plan for getting the short-term requirement amount to meet up that deficit. The cash budget is probably the most important tool in cash management. It is a device to help a firm to plan and control the use of cash. So it will help you to plan and control the use of cash. It's a statement showing the estimated cash inflow and outflow over the planning horizon. So it will be made for 6 months or 8 months, and it will show you estimated inflows and outflows for those many months. In other words, the net cash position, that is the surplus or deficit of a firm, as it moves from one budgeting sub period to another is highlighted by the cash budget. So it will tell you how much surplus or deficit you have. So this was about cash management, how to manage cash, how to find the long-term investments plan and short-term investment plan, how to manage your surplus cash, and how to basically work on concentration banking and logbook system. Thank you.